Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel if you're returning. If you're new here, my name is Tori. I normally make planner content on my channel, but today I figured I would show you a very sped up reading journal entry session. It's split up over a couple of different sessions, so lighting does change, and as you can see at the very first clips of this, I was trying to use my fountain pens and needed to do some refilling, and I've been using some samples, but I've been struggling to get the sample inside of my pens because the sample vial is a little bit small, and so I ended up purchasing like an ink syringe. It's a whole thing. But anyways, so I just want to go ahead and dive right into talking about this reading journal. It is my 2024 reading journal, and I have since moved into a different journal, but I did want to complete my entries on my last reads. These are not all the reads for the rest of the year, and I don't really have a specific timeline of everything, but I work as a children's and teen librarian, so my reading is really varied depending on my mood, but also what I feel like I need to just read to make sure that I'm aware of in children's literature and things of that nature. So this first entry that I'm writing about is about Mayor Goodboy, and it was that's short term for compared to Dogman. And if you have a middle grade reader, a middle grade reader, or an elementary reader, they probably, especially if they're boys, they love them some Captain Underpants and Dogman. And Captain Underpants actually came out when I was a kid, so I definitely understand the pull. But Mayor Goodboy just kind of felt like gimmicky in my mind, so I was kind of writing about how, yes, I could recommend it to a child who comes into my library, but I don't know. It felt like it was more for the graphic novel appeal than it was a storyline, because the storyline to me didn't really seem cohesive, and it felt like it was more just to provide a vehicle for a comic that was similar in style to Dogman, because they knew it would sell. And I can't guarantee that any of the kids are going to notice that, but that's just my own opinion as an adult reading that comic versus a Dogman book. Dogman actually, that series, if you're familiar with it, actually retells stories of classics. So there's Dogman and the Scarlet Shredder, which is supposed to be its retelling of the Scarlet Letter, and it does it on a appropriate level for the readers and everything. But Mayor Goodboy just wasn't doing it for me, This next entry that I have here, I just have some washi tape and some Walmart stickers because it is another installation in my cozy mystery series that I've been reading for a couple of years now. I dip in and out of it whenever I feel like I just want something that's low stakes and I like the character. So this one's called Chilled to the Cone. The author is Ellie Alexander, and I think, let me look at the actual entry to see what the next one is that I'm turning to at that point. Nothing Bundt Trouble. So this mystery series follows a woman named Juliet who lives in a town in Oregon known for its Shakespearean odes to, it has a really big Shakespeare theater circuit, and their town is built up around the tourist industry regarding their Shakespearean theater experience and things of that nature. And she runs a small bakery, and in the first one, Chilled to the Cone, she ends up breaking out into a bit of a, she goes out and makes another location where they only serve ice cream, and it's a seasonal thing. And then this next one is where she explores her memory of her father, who passed away before the series started when she was a kid. And I found it to be really a really smart idea in the way that the author did it, because she was that her father has been gone for a really long time, and there's no real believable way to incorporate him into the story. So what she does is she ends up connecting with her father's best friend as they read through his journal. And how all of this combines into the mystery element of it is that she's reading her father's journal entries about a mystery he helped to investigate when he was still alive. And so I found it just a smart way to connect those threads of the character that I wouldn't have thought to do. So I got a lot of respect for the author in that book. The next one is Mocha, She Wrote. That's the 13th book in the series. Again, I've been reading the series for a couple years now. It's not anything that I read back to back. These just happen to be back to back. But I definitely read books in between these titles. I just wanted to make entries about these specific titles because I like reading them and I enjoy them. And a lot of these books I had read a really long time ago, and I was trying to kind of journal off of memory's sake. So they're a lot more feelings focused than, regurgitating the plot or storylines that I thought were compelling, if I'm being honest. Because I couldn't remember a lot, and what my memory was being jogged as I was writing about it. This next series is a trilogy written by Nimmo. She wrote the Charlie Bone series. It's kind of like a comp to Harry Potter that was written in the early 90s, and so I have all of that series, and I wanted to read this trilogy that she wrote. And I really like Jenny Nimmo, but it's just, and here I'm having fountain pen difficulties yet again. But essentially, it feels like Jenny Nimmo writes for vibes instead of plot. And I don't mean that to say that it's not a good story, but it just never feels like she can really connect the dots in a way that feels fully cohesive to me. And I had this issue with the series that I do own, the Charlie Bone series, because the largest arc of that series kind of fizzles really quickly once it's, played itself out. And then you're kind of like, okay, but wasn't this the whole concern the whole time? And now we're just completely dropping that narrative. And so I did write down some of the quotes that I had saved, because that was honestly the only reason I kept these books around. I had them from my library, and they weren't circulating, so they got pulled from my collection, and I took them home to read them, and I since donated them back to our friends at the library to sell. But yeah, it wasn't a bad series, and I don't want anything I say to construe that, because it really wasn't. But it felt like, I don't know, calling it a trilogy feels really, it felt like a stretch, even though they are about the same people in each book. It kind of feels like they're siblings and not triplets, is all I gotta say. So I guess that was kind of my interpretation of that going forward. And then the next entries are about the princess and the grilled cheese sandwich. And I really, really liked this graphic novel. It is an adult or teen graphic novel, I think. I'm not sure if it was marketed as YA. I think it was, though. Essentially, it's this countess who loses her father, and in order to maintain the rights to to her inheritance, she portrays herself as a man, and she ends up falling in love with a princess. And once their identities revealed, feelings come about like, you lied to me, or and it navigates that, I guess, conflict within their relationship. It asks the questions of, like, is it worth it to continue pursuing this relationship now that the disguise has been revealed? And it's a really great story about acceptance and appreciating people for who they are, and understanding that a physical appearance is only the first layer of really who somebody truly is, and to understand that that is not necessarily what will make or break your affection for them. The second entry here is Lisey's story by Stephen King. Ironically, I have only read one other book by Stephen King, and it is his book on writing, called On Writing. Like, that's the only book I've ever read by Stephen King. So this one I listened to on audiobook because I was trying to go back through my Goodreads, and I've had my Goodreads since for over 10 years now. And so I was going back to my Goodreads to be read list and trying to, like, pull out books that I'd marked as I'd wanted to read years ago. And this was one of them. And it just, I don't know, this one didn't hit really well for me. I don't know. I feel like Stephen King was trying to do some real good here, but I just would have preferred a female author for this story. And if that's sexist, so be it, because it's about this woman who is picking up the legacy of her well-known famous author husband, and I don't know, just felt a little on the nose. It felt a little on the nose. And I haven't done any research into what inspired that novel, whether it was King's own experience with his wife or something else, but it didn't hit the right note for me. So that was kind of unfortunate. It did have some supernatural elements that also kind of felt like if they weren't there, it wouldn't have changed anything for me. So that was another thing of, like, I understand that Stephen King writes supernatural horror. Like, he writes horror stories. That's what he's known for. And they have supernatural elements. But that story really, like, Lisey's story, it felt like had that portion, the supernatural elements of the story, not been in it, it would have been the same story. It didn't add or take away anything for me. So I kind of felt like meh about it. And just a side note, I am writing with my Lamy All-Star that I got. It is the limited edition Hufflepuff edition, and I adore it. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a gorge pen. I know. The next story that I am journaling about is The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. If you know anything about The Queen's Gambit, you know it received a very popular Netflix adaptation. And the adaptation actually stays pretty true to the book, but I had always, I'm always one, I want to read the book before I watch it. So that was kind of my purpose behind this. And it was solely like a mood pick. I was not wanting to read this because I felt like I had to. I just picked it because I was in the mood, and it was on audio through my Libby app. So I listened to it, and I found it to be quite nuanced. Like, where Lisey's story with Stephen King felt kind of on the nose and like a formulaic female perspective for a man to write from, The Queen's Gambit felt really nuanced in ways that I didn't feel or I didn't connect with in Lisey's story. Not that these stories are comparable by any means. They're two completely different female characters and two completely different parts of life. And so, but it's men writing women, and I always kind of hesitate with that because I'm like, I don't know. I just have had some interesting reading experiences when it comes to male writers writing female women, and especially like older books, right? I wouldn't say it happens so much now with newer published things, but something about older published books of male authors writing female perspectives just never sits right with me. And so this one actually really, I found it to be really, really compelling. It felt very multi-layered. Beth as a character was so complex. And, it's quite obvious in the book that, like, maybe Tevis was exploring what it would look like to be a female on the autism spectrum, because there is some neurodiversity there, even though it's never, outlined explicitly, because Beth just does not have the social cues that are expected for her in society. And I think that Tevis does a really good job of exploring what that would look like for a woman who is unapologetic about herself and just does what she wants and goes for what she wants at a very young age. And I found that to be really interesting and very I keep saying compelling, but I was enraptured by Beth's resilience and her determination to she knew she was good at something and was not afraid to be good at it. And she knew when she was bad at it. Like, she knew when she was ruining her situation. She was doing some self-sabotage in different areas of her life, and she knew when she was doing that. She was self-aware enough to know, like, I know I'm doing this, but I don't care, because that was her form of grieving, or that was her form of how she was rebelling in the moment. I just found her character really believable, and I enjoyed the reading process of that. The next one that I wrote about is the Firekeeper's daughter, and I really, really appreciated this story as well. It is by Angeline Boulley, and it is from the perspective of Donis, and she is trying to navigate her identity within her tribal identity of being Ojibwe, and then, like, she has a mom who is still devastated by her father's passing, and there's some complicated family dynamics between her father, her mother, and her half-brother and his mother. And this story explores what it means to be Native in a world that this story explores what it means to be Native in a world that is actively seeking to dismantle her identity and agency as a female Indigenous woman, and what that looks like in her community, and how she and other members of her community kind of stand up to that. I really liked the way it ended, because it felt like everything had the right answer going forward, even if it wasn't a pleasant one. And it felt realistic, and like I was dropped right into the story. So I really liked that read. The next one was The Bennet Women. This was a Pride and Prejudice retelling that it was okay. It just felt like it was trying to do a lot, and it didn't give itself enough time to accomplish all of the goals that it had within the writing. It focused on EJ and Will, and obviously EJ is supposed to be Elizabeth, and then Will is supposed to be Darcy, and they meet on their college campus. There's a lot of commentary about class and race and sexuality, gender norms, all of these things that are awesome topics to be discussing. But it was like the author tried so many things that they couldn't squish it all into their page count or something. And I felt like a lot more needed to be explored to really marinate on these topics that were of such importance. But when it got to EJ and Will coming together, it was like, okay, that was it. Bye. And so it just kind of, it didn't feel like it spent enough time giving the characters the consideration that they should have, that I felt like they should have had. This next story was another Goodreads to be read book, and by that I mean that was another one where I scrolled through like 10 years ago of books that I had marked that I wanted to read, And I think I might have wanted to read this one because of the description of the friendship and the synopsis of the book, but this story was the one that fell flat the most for me. It's called Bennington Girls Are Easy, and it is by Charlotte Silver, I believe. I write it there, but it's very meh. And to me, it was meh because in this time of our society, in my personal opinion, you have to be very, very good at writing compelling and nuanced characters, especially if they are rich white characters. And this was not that. This was very surface level friend spats that honestly, I would tune out the audiobook half the time. And I knew I wasn't really enjoying the book when I would tune the audiobook out, come back to it, and be like, I'm not going to go back and try to figure out what's going on. I'm just going to keep listening because I want this book to be over. It was like not the juicy, good kind of like rich white people problems where you're enjoying watching the character development, because there was no character development. It was just two annoying characters being annoying to each other and then couldn't understand why they found each other annoying. It was annoying. So there was that. The next book that I have in here is The Haunting of Brynn Wilder by Wendy Webb. This one was doing some interesting things as well, but I halfway suspected where the ending would go, and then when it did go where I suspected it would, it didn't spend enough time there. So that was my main gripe, I guess, with this one, was that it didn't spend enough time on the part of the big reveal. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm reading a lot of books that do so much build up to a climax, but then when the climax hits, it's like the author doesn't know what to do. So they just it dies with a whimper. And that was another one of those reads. This next story that I am journaling about is The Wilds by Sarah Pearse. This is another series that I really, really am enjoying right now. It is the third in the Detective Ellen Horner stories. It has a great audiobook narrator. She's very British. She says glacier instead of glacier. I love it. But, great audiobook narration aside, the aspects of society that Pearse explores in these mysteries is really relevant to our time. And this last one really focused heavily on domestic violence and what that looks like in a very intimate setting and how it kind of grows over time. And it's like Pearse really took the perspective of, I don't know if you've ever heard of that folk story of the frog boiling itself alive because the temperature of the water that it's sitting in grows and grows. Like, that's kind of the metaphor that Pearse is working with in that story, and I found it really powerful and definitely worth the read if you can handle hearing about some really toxic behaviors. But it was a really, really great mystery, and I did not see the ending coming. I never do with her writing, so I really enjoyed that as well. The next one that I wrote about was Ancestor Approved, and this is a short story collection, and it's called Ancestor Approved Intertribal Stories for Kids. It is a juvenile read that I have in my collection, but I listen to it on audio because I find that specifically with Indigenous writing that is so rooted in the traditions of telling stories aloud and oral storytelling traditions, they just hit so different with audio, and I love that. So I did listen to this, and there were connections between each of the stories, and I did find them really, really great. It was educational about powwows and what you would need to do in order to enter a powwow, your jingle dress setups, your fancy dances. Like, I learned a lot about just intertribal dynamics with this book, but the audio narrators were not my cup of tea, so that was kind of the only thing that kind of hindered me there. The next book that I read was Meet Me on Christmas Eve, and I struggled with this one as well because it was another book that I felt like the author really rushed to get to the climax, and then when the climax happened, there wasn't enough time spent on understanding how things had to get there, in my opinion. And there were additional plot points that just felt thrown in last minute. And they were pretty significant plot points that I felt deserved a lot more time spent on them than there was. And so by the end, I felt like I was just kind of left holding the bag. And so that was kind of my impression of that one as well. The final book that I wrote about in these sessions is a nonfiction read by Daniel Goleman called Emotional Intelligence. And I kind of scrapped the thought that I was going to journal about it in my reading journal. By this point, I have been in this journal for 2 years and I'm over it. I want to expand to something bigger, and I still have some extra pages in this journal. I may come back to it at some point, but so I decided that I would actually write about this alongside my other mental health notes that I have in my personal journal, because I would reference what's in my daily journal more than I would this reading journal. So that is a final look at my reading journal. I will probably do a flip of this entirely in another video, but if you made it this far and you're still around, and if you're not already subscribed, I hope you'll consider subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.